The last thing the camera captured was a pair of hands, gloved, deliberate, reaching straight for the lens. And then nothing. The feed cut at exactly 1:47 in the morning. What you just watched is the only visual record of the moment Nancy Guthrie's life was taken out of her control. She was 84 years old, pacemaker dependent, living alone in the Catalina foothills of Tucson, Arizona. And from the moment that camera went dark, she had at most 41 minutes before whoever took her was gone. This is case one. And this series is not just about her disappearance. It is about the wall that went up around this investigation the moment it started. Who built it, why they built it, and what it may have already cost. We are going to walk through every forensic decision, every blocked lead, every on-record statement that exposes what was really happening inside the Pima County Sheriff's Department while Nancy Guthrie was still missing. Stay with this. Because nothing about this case is what it first appeared to be. If you are new here, subscribe right now before we go any further. On this channel, we do not do speculation, we do not do filler. Every claim you are about to hear is sourced. Reuters, NBC, News Nation, the Daily Mail, CBS, and on-record statements from law enforcement insiders. We follow the evidence, we name names, and we stay with a case until the full picture is on the table. This picture is not finished yet. January 31st, 2026. A Saturday evening, Tucson, Arizona. Nancy Guthrie, born January 27, 1942, had spent the evening at her daughter's home. Dinner, card games, a completely normal Saturday. At 9:48 p.m., her son-in-law drove her home and watched the garage door close behind her. That was the last confirmed sighting by anyone who knew her. What followed was reconstructed from 3 digital fragments. 1:47 a.m. The doorbell camera went offline. Not a malfunction. Someone disconnected it, deliberately, from the outside. 2:12 a.m. An interior motion sensor logged activity inside the home. No footage retained. Just a timestamp, a cold mechanical record of something moving through that house in the dark. 2:28 a.m. Nancy's pacemaker disconnected from its monitoring app. The device logged the exact moment it lost its signal. No alarm, no call, just silence in the data. Camera offline, motion detected, pacemaker silent, 41 minutes. That is the entire window investigators had to work with. Now picture the forensic team the next morning. Monitors glowing in a dim room, the sound of keyboards. Someone writing timestamps by hand on a legal pad while a technician pulls corrupted data from a cloud server that should have had nothing left to give. The weight in that room was not abstract. Nancy was pacemaker dependent. Her medication, the sheriff would later publicly confirm, could become life-threatening within 24 hours of being withheld. The clock was not a figure of speech, it was a medical reality. An 84-year-old woman, a device in her chest that required monitoring, and a 41-minute window closing fast behind whoever had walked out of that garage. Ask yourself, if those 3 timestamps were on the screen in front of you, and the FBI was standing in the building ready to move, what is the first call you make? Because the first call that was actually made in this investigation set off a chain of decisions that the sheriff's own former second-in-command would eventually describe on the record as an 11-year grudge, dressed up as procedure. Before you can understand why this investigation was run the way it was, you need to understand the man running it. Because the decisions that defined this case did not come from nowhere. They came from a history. A specific, documented, 11-year history between Sheriff Chris Nanos and the FBI. And once you know that history, every decision we are going to examine across this series stops looking like poor judgment and starts looking like something far more calculated. Chris Nanos had spent decades inside the Pima County Sheriff's Department before taking the top seat. He understood its structure, its culture, its internal politics, the way only a career insider can. He knew where the loyalty lived and where it didn't. He knew the department's pressure points, and he knew the FBI, not as an ally, as the organization that had once aimed a federal investigation directly at the department he commanded. In 2015, the FBI opened a formal investigation into the Pima County Sheriff's Department for alleged misuse of civil asset forfeiture funds. These are funds and assets seized during criminal investigations, property that departments are required to account for under strict federal oversight guidelines. The investigation was not quiet, it drew public scrutiny. It put the department under a federal microscope at exactly the moment Nanos needed the public's confidence most. The fallout contributed directly to Nanos losing his re-election bid in 2016. Sit with that for a moment. A career law enforcement officer, decades inside the same building, voted out publicly while a federal investigation hung over the agency he commanded. That is not an abstraction. That is a man watching everything he built get dismantled in real time, with a federal agency holding the tool that did the dismantling. He eventually won the office back. He returned, he resumed command. The building looked the same. The badge was the same. But something had shifted permanently in how he related to the organization that had put him through that. Richard Castigar Jr. knew this better than almost anyone alive. He served as Nanos' chief deputy, the direct second in command, for years inside that department before retiring in 2023 after 46 years of service. He did not speak anonymously when this case broke open. He put his name on the record. Speaking to the Daily Mail, Castigar said, and I am quoting directly, he has great disdain for the FBI. They investigated his department in 2016, and he's still angry. He holds a grudge. That sentence did not come from a political opponent. It did not come from a journalist inferring motivation from the outside. It came from the man who sat directly across the organizational chart from Chris Nanos for years, the man who watched him operate up close through pressure and politics and the daily reality of running a large law enforcement agency. Castigar also called him again, direct quote, a quintessential micromanager who is not effective. Two characterizations, one source. 46 years of first-hand observation behind both of them. Ask yourself, when the case of a lifetime arrives and solving it requires you to hand evidence to the organization you believe derailed your career, how clean is that decision? How much of that professional history walks into the room with you when you sit down to make the call? Because in February 2026, that exact scenario landed on that desk. The FBI was present, the evidence existed, and a decision was made. What that decision looked like, what it cost, and what it revealed about the evidence chain is exactly where we are going next. 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home, an open field near a roadside, an investigator crouched down and documented what they found: a single black glove, fitted, dark, visually consistent with the glove worn by the figure captured on Nancy's doorbell camera. The same camera that had gone dark at 1:47 in the morning, 14 days earlier. Inside that glove was biological material, DNA, unknown male, unidentified. The glove was recovered on February 15th, 2026, 2 weeks into the investigation. The moment it was logged into evidence, the investigative logic was clean and direct. You process the sample. You run it against the national database. You get a result. That result either identifies the suspect or it eliminates a pathway and opens a new one. Either way, the investigation moves forward. That is how forensic evidence is supposed to function. That is the entire point of collecting it. The FBI had a direct and proven pipeline for exactly this scenario. The evidence goes to Quantico, Virginia. The National Crime Lab runs it against CODIS, a federal database carrying genetic profiles from over 19 million individuals with prior criminal processing histories. And if CODIS returned nothing, a second pathway was sitting ready: ARAM, a forensic genetic genealogy lab in Texas. Their work had already closed the Idaho College murder case, a case we are going to break down in detail shortly. In that investigation, a DNA sample from a single knife sheath went to ARAM. Within 48 hours, they traced the suspect's ancestry, built a family tree, and narrowed the search to 2 families in Pennsylvania. An arrest followed 47 days after the crime. Proven, documented, repeatable. The FBI asked Sheriff Nanos to send the glove evidence to Quantico. He said no. Reuters confirmed this through a federal law enforcement official on February 12th. Nanos directed the evidence instead to DNA Labs International, a private laboratory in Deerfield Beach, Florida, 2,000 miles from Tucson, 2,000 miles from Quantico. The county had spent approximately $200, U0 in taxpayer funds, routing evidence to this private facility, rather than transferring it to the federal lab that was already present and already asking. The FBI's internal reaction, as reported by News Nation, was unambiguous. The decision was described as, and these are the words used by federal agents, dumb and insane. The blocked material was characterized as essentially all of the evidence in the case. Now, here is what the Florida lab returned. The glove DNA was run against CODIS. No match. The unknown male profile did not correspond to any of the 19 million profiles in the national database. The interior biological material, recovered from inside Nancy's home, came back low-level, partial, and mixed with profiles from individuals with legitimate access to the residence, unusable for a standard identification profile. And then came the detail that reframed everything. The 2 samples, the glove and the interior material, did not match each other. 2 separate unknown profiles, no CODIS hit on either, and a $200,000 private lab decision standing between both samples and the genetic genealogy, technology that forensic specialist Cece Moore said could potentially produce an identification in minutes or hours, 25 days in. 0 identifiable suspects through the pathway the sheriff chose. Former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindeffer raised a question publicly that has not been answered. whether the private lab had already handled the biological material in a way that compromised it for genetic genealogy entirely, whether the sample that could have gone through the same process that caught a killer in 47 days had been damaged beyond the point of no return. That question is still open. Ask yourself, when the right tool is already in the room, already asking to help, what does it truly cost to say no? In this case, the answer to that question is still being measured. Real quick before we keep going, where are you watching this from right now? Drop your city and state in the comments. I read them. Every single one. This case has people paying attention from all over the country, and I want to know where you are. And if someone sent you this video, hit subscribe. You are going to want to be here for the rest of this series. Now, back to Tucson. 400 personnel were assigned to this case. FBI agents were on the ground. Seasoned homicide detectives with decades of combined experience were inside the building. The resources were there. The expertise was there. The manpower was there. And every single decision was passing through three men. Just three. Sources inside the Pima County Sheriff's Department spoke to the Daily Mail on condition of anonymity during the investigation. What they described was not a command structure built for efficiency. It was a fortress built for control. Sheriff Nanos had confined all decision-making authority in the Nancy Guthrie case to himself, Chief Jesus Lopez and Captain Juan Carlos Navarro. Those three men filtered every operational call, every strategic direction, every piece of information that moved up or down the chain. One source put it plainly. He will only let himself or two of his hand-picked staffers make decisions on the case. Everybody else is being told what to do. No one else has a say or an opinion. Another source described the structural consequence of that arrangement. Normally, an experienced detective steers a case like this, reading the forensic patterns, adjusting the strategy in real time, providing updates through the chain of command. What was happening instead was the opposite. It is the tail wagging the dog. That phrase carries specific weight when you understand what it means in practice. Picture a room full of investigators who have spent careers working kidnappings, people who understand the behavioral indicators, the forensic pressures, the timeline reality of a case involving an elderly victim with a medical dependency. Those people were present. Their knowledge was available. And the structure above them was not asking for it. The FBI was experiencing the same wall from the outside. An FBI source told the American Tribune that agents had reached a point where they were not even certain why the stonewalling was happening. The exact quote, "He is stonewalling them. They are not even sure why." That is not bureaucratic frustration. That is a federal agency that was invited into an investigation, showed up with its full capability, and found itself operating in a deliberate fog. Former FBI Special Agent Maureen O'Connell told NewsNation directly, "If there are issues, they are usually at the top. They are usually not among the boots on the ground doing the work." And the boots on the ground, by every account, were working. Deputies in the field, detectives processing leads, analysts running down tips from a line that had received over 19,000 calls. The machinery of the investigation was moving, but the people controlling its direction had narrowed the decision layer to three individuals, whose primary qualification in this context appeared to be their proximity to the sheriff. Former Pima County SWAT Commander Bob Creer told NewsNation the situation was approaching a breaking point. At some point, that bridge is going to have to be crossed. The resources the FBI provides are exponentially more than what the sheriff's office can provide. That bridge, as of day 25, had not been crossed. You have to ask yourself, what does an investigation actually look like when the people most capable of solving it are being kept at arm's length by the people nominally running it? When expertise is present but authority is withheld. When three men in a room are deciding what 400 people are allowed to know, that is not an investigation operating at its capacity. That is an investigation operating at the capacity of its smallest bottleneck. And that bottleneck had a history with the FBI that nobody inside that room was talking about publicly yet. I want you to stop for just a second, because I think it is easy to hear all of that and process it as a list of failures. Decisions made poorly, opportunities missed. But what we are describing is not a list of mistakes. It is a pattern. And the next section, the television disclosures, is where that pattern becomes impossible to explain away. If you have not hit the like button yet, do it now. It tells YouTube this story is worth showing to more people. And this one needs to be seen. Every kidnapping investigation runs on one principle above everything else: information control. You tell the public what helps them help you. Everything else stays locked. You never, under any circumstances, tell the suspect what you know, what you don't know, and how long it will take to find them. That discipline is not bureaucratic caution. It is operational survival. The moment a suspect understands the boundaries of what investigators have, they can work inside those boundaries indefinitely. Sheriff Nanos went on national television and dismantled that principle piece by piece. On day 2 of the investigation, the sheriff told reporters that Nancy's medication could become life-threatening within 24 hours of being withheld. Medically accurate. Also a precise gift of intelligence to whoever was holding her. It defined the window. It told them exactly when the calculation around keeping her alive would shift. A clock, handed directly to the person who needed to know it was running. Earlier in the investigation, the sheriff publicly confirmed that law enforcement was deploying an FBI Bluetooth signal detection device mounted on a helicopter specifically to locate Nancy's pacemaker signal. The technology was designed to be covert. It required the aircraft to fly at low altitude in close proximity to the target signal to function. Its detection range was limited. Its effectiveness depended entirely on the suspect not knowing it existed. The moment it was confirmed publicly, that effectiveness was gone. President Trump addressed this directly from Air Force One on February 19th. He said he did not like that they had talked about going after the pacemaker signal before they had even started. That if someone could track it, that way the person holding Nancy would simply make sure they could not. That is not political commentary. The pacemaker sweeps did not produce a confirmed signal. On February 23rd, day 23 of the investigation, Sheriff Nanos sat down with NBCC and said on camera that the DNA analysis was facing challenges. That results might resolve themselves in a matter of weeks, months, or maybe a year. Picture whoever took Nancy Guthrie watching that interview. The living room, the television, the sheriff of Pima County sitting across from a national news anchor, describing in plain language exactly how much time the investigation had before it could identify anyone. What that person heard in that moment was not a press conference update. It was an operational window. That was not the only disclosure. Nanos also confirmed on NBC that investigators were making progress identifying the suspect's shoes, pants, shirt, and jacket, and that they were showing holster photographs to local gun shop owners. NBC separately reported that FBI agents had visited at least one gun shop with a list of approximately 24 images. Every one of those disclosures told the suspect what investigators had identified and exactly how they were using. In the Idaho investigation, the FBI made one public statement before the arrest. Male average build, 5'9" to 5'10". Nothing else. No lab timelines, no technology, no clothing, no methodology. 47 days later, an arrest. Slow ask yourself, if you were the investigator in that room, watching each of those disclosures go out in real time, what would you be thinking? Because the gap between what was said and what should have stayed silent may be the most consequential distance in this entire case. To understand how badly the Guthrie investigation stalled, you need to look at a case where everything worked, where the right decisions were made in the right order by the right people, where the evidence went where it needed to go, and the result came back in a time frame that should have been the benchmark for Tucson. November 13, 2022, Moscow, Idaho. 4 University of Idaho students were found dead inside a rental home near campus. The crime scene yielded one critical piece of physical evidence, a knife sheath left behind, a single object carrying a single DNA sample from an unknown male. Investigators sent that sample to Aram. Within 48 hours of receiving the sample, Aram's forensic genetic genealogy process had traced the suspect's ancestry, constructed a family tree, and narrowed the search to 2 families in the state of Pennsylvania. The FBI built a suspect identification from that genealogical profile. Law enforcement located the individual, conducted surveillance, recovered a secondary DNA sample from discarded material, confirmed the match, and made the arrest. Brian Kohberger was taken into custody 47 days after the murders. 47 days, 1 DNA sample, 1 lab, 1 pipeline that moved without obstruction from the crime scene straight through to an arrest. The FBI did not hold press conferences describing their technology. They did not disclose their DNA timeline on national television. They did not confirm which clothing items they were tracing or which shops they were visiting. One public statement, a physical description, and then silence until handcuffs were on Idaho. DNA sample sent to the right lab within days. Arrest 47 days. Tucson, DNA sample sent to a private Florida lab, no CODIS match. 2 samples that don't match each other. Day 25, 0 identified suspects. C.C. Moore, the forensic genetic genealogist who worked the Kohberger identification, told CNN she was extremely hopeful about the Guthrie case. She said that if the suspect carried deep American ancestry, the ISMIP profiling process that powers genetic genealogy could potentially produce an identification in minutes or hours. She was not overstating the technology, she was describing exactly what had already been demonstrated in Idaho. David Middleman, the CEO of IRAM, spoke to the Daily Mail about the Guthrie investigation. He said getting answers quickly was paramount, and warned explicitly against any delays in the evidence pipeline. The warning came after the delay had already happened. The difference between those two outcomes was not luck. It was a decision. There is a particular weight that comes with a statement made by someone who has nothing to gain from making it. No political agenda. No outside rivalry. No institutional distance from the subject. Just decades of first-hand knowledge, and a decision that the public deserved to hear what those decades had taught them. That is what happened when the people closest to Sheriff Nensos started talking. Richard Castigar Jr. was not a junior deputy offering a second-hand opinion. He was the chief deputy, the number 2, the man who sat directly across the organizational chart from Chris Nanos for years before retiring in 2023 after 46 years of service inside the same department. When he spoke to the Daily Mail, he did not hedge. This case should have been turned over to the FBI 2 weeks ago. All the evidence should have gone to Quantico from the beginning. And then the line that has defined the public understanding of this investigation. Ever since he has great disdain for the FBI. They investigated his department in 2016 and he's still angry. He holds a grudge. But Castigar was not the only voice. And that matters because a single dissenting voice, however credible, can be framed as personal. What cannot be framed as personal is a pattern of voices. From inside the same institution, across different roles, different levels of seniority, all arriving at the same conclusion independently. Visual cue, lower third identifying SGT. Aaron Cross, President, Pima County Deputies Organization. Sergeant Aaron Cross is the president of the Pima County Deputies Organization. That is the union that represents the sheriff's own workforce, the deputies he commands, the people who work inside his department every single day. Cross told reporters directly that it is, and I'm quoting, a common belief in this agency that this case has become an ego case for Sheriff Nanos. That is not an outside assessment. That is institutional consensus, expressed by the elected representative of the sheriff's own people. Former Chief Deputy Richard Carmona went on television. He praised the rank and file without reservation. The detectives, the deputies in the field, the analysts, everyone focused on the mission. And then he aimed at the top with the kind of precision that only comes from someone who has stood at that level and knows what it is supposed to look like. Slow. We are just disappointed at the level or lack of leadership at the senior position. Lack of leadership on national television from a former chief deputy about his own department's sitting sheriff. Former FBI Special Agent Maureen O'Connell had framed the structural reality of this earlier and precisely. If there are issues, they are usually at the top. They are usually not among the boots on the ground doing the work. 3 statements, 3 sources. 3 different vantage points inside or adjacent to the same institution, all pointing in the same direction. Ask yourself, what does it take for people who have spent careers inside a law enforcement agency, people whose professional identity is bound up in that institution, to go on record against its leadership during an active missing persons investigation? Pause. That is not a casual decision. Slow. That is a decision made when someone believes the silence has already cost too much. The silence inside that department had a price, and the people paying it were not the ones in the 3-man room. On day 24, something shifted outside the official structure entirely. No press conference, no podium, no carefully managed statement filtered through a department communications office. Just a phone, a 4-minute video, a yellow sweater, and a woman sitting alone in a frame who had decided that the language of managed optimism had run out of time. Savannah Guthrie posted to Instagram on February 24th. And what she said in those 4 minutes accomplished something that 24 days of official press conferences had not. She told the truth. She may already be gone. Those 5 words landed differently than anything the sheriff had said from any podium, not because they were dramatic, because they were honest, because they acknowledged what the forensic reality of this case had been pointing toward for weeks and what the official messaging had been carefully stepping around. An 84-year-old woman, pacemaker dependent, missing for 24 days. The 24-hour medication window the sheriff himself had described on day 2 had passed more than 500 times over. Savannah did not pretend otherwise. The response was immediate. The family announced a $1 million reward for information leading to Nancy's recovery. Within 24 hours, over 600 targeted calls came into the tip line. The FBI confirmed that number. The 911 dispatch system that had been drowning under 19 mostly unverifiable tips suddenly had something different moving through it. Volume with direction. A federal official told NBC the line that defines exactly what that reward was designed to do. We don't need another 1,000 calls. We need one. That one call is not coming from a stranger who noticed something from a window. It is coming from someone who already knows. Someone sitting with information they have carried because of loyalty or fear or a calculation that had not yet tipped in the right direction. $1 million has a way of recalculating things. The family also announced a $500 zero donation to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children on the same day. That detail matters because it signals something about the family's state of mind. This was not purely a rescue operation framing. This was a family thinking about legacy, about what Nancy would have wanted, regardless of outcome. NBC also reported that Savannah had wanted to offer the reward earlier in the investigation. Law enforcement had discouraged it, citing concerns about overwhelming the tip line. The family posted anyway. Think about that decision. A family watching an official investigation operate behind a wall they could not see through, making a unilateral move with their own resources, because they had concluded that waiting inside the official process was no longer an option. 4 minutes of honesty produced more actionable response than 3.5 weeks of managed messaging. Ask yourself what that says about the information the public had been given, and what it says about what they had been waiting to hear. 25 days after Sheriff Nanos stood at a podium and said the words that should have defined the boundary of this investigation, "The scene is done. We are done with the residents." Something happened that made those words impossible to reconcile with what was unfolding on camera. February 25th. Day 25, 9:15 in the morning. News Nation cameras were positioned outside Nancy Guthrie's home in the Catalina foothills when 2 unmarked white vehicles pulled up to the property. One individual entered through the back door, stayed inside for approximately 30 minutes, left without a word to anyone waiting outside. Then at 10:08 a.m., the real presence arrived. Multiple black SUVs, more than 6 individuals, several of them in suits. They moved through the property with the deliberate efficiency of people who knew exactly what they were looking for and exactly where they intended to look. One vehicle pulled entirely inside the garage. The garage door closed behind it. News Nation described it as the largest law enforcement presence at that residence in over a week. Sit with that. The sheriff had released this crime scene on day 1, 20 hours after Nancy disappeared. He had looked at his team and declared it finished. 3.5 weeks later, suits and federal vehicles were rolling through the garage of a scene he had publicly closed before the investigation had produced a single identified suspect. Something had changed. Something had brought them back, and Sheriff Nano said nothing publicly about what it was. On February 26th, a separate development added another layer. New video footage emerged showing a vehicle traveling at speed approximately 2.5 miles from Nancy's home at 2:30 a.m. on February 1st. A timestamp sitting directly inside the 41-minute window. The vehicle's occupants had not been identified, but the timing placed it precisely where it mattered most. A vehicle moving through the Catalina foothills at 2:30 in the morning on the same night Nancy Guthrie was removed from her home, 2.5 miles from her front door, inside the window, unidentified. Ask yourself, what was missed the first time that required suits and black SUVs to go back through a garage 25 days later? Because the answer to that question sits at the center of everything this investigation has been building toward. Every case has a moment where the full weight of every decision made along the way lands in one place at the same time, where the lab choice and the blocked access and the national television disclosures and the 3-man circle and the released crime scene all stop being individual failures and become something you can only describe as a pattern. This is that moment, not because the case is closed. It is not. But because enough of the record is now visible to understand what happened inside the Pima County Sheriff's Department from the first hour of February 1st, 2026. And why the investigation into the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie unfolded the way it did. An 84-year-old woman was removed from her home in 41 minutes. The forensic window was tight from the first hour. Biological material that could have moved this investigation toward an identification was sitting in a room with the right people, the right technology, and the right pipeline available to process it. The decision that sent it 2,000 miles in the wrong direction was made by one man. And every subsequent decision, who was in the room, what the FBI was allowed to touch, what went on national television, what the suspect was allowed to hear, flowed from that same source. Sergeant Aaron Cross said it was a common belief inside the agency that this had become an ego case. Richard Castigar Jr. said all the evidence should have gone to Quantico from the beginning. Richard Carmona said the department was disappointed at the lack of leadership at the senior position. Bob Creer said that bridge to full FBI operational involvement had to be crossed, and that the resources the FBI provided were exponentially greater than what the sheriff's office could offer alone. Those are not outside critics with an agenda. Those are the sheriff's own people, speaking on the record, with their names attached. As of the time this script was written, Nancy Guthrie had been missing for more than 37 days. No arrest had been made. No suspect had been publicly named. The FBI had shifted its command post from Tucson to Phoenix while maintaining a ground presence in the Catalina foothills. The tip line remained active. The $1 million family reward remained active. What accountability looks like in a case like this is not always immediate. Jurisdictional boundaries are legal structures that exist for legitimate reasons. But those structures become something else entirely when they are being used to insulate a personal grudge from the consequences it is producing in a live investigation. When the wall stops being about jurisdiction and starts being about 11 years of unresolved institutional anger, the person paying the price for that wall is not the sheriff. It is Nancy. If you have any information about the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, contact the FBI Phoenix Field Office or the Pima County Sheriff's Department tip line directly. Both numbers are in the description below. The family reward of $1 million remains active. The link is there. Before you go, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments right now. And tell me, what part of this investigation do you think needs a closer look? Because this series is not done. There are threads in this case that we have not pulled yet, and we are going to pull every single one. If this video gave you something, a like takes 2 seconds and it puts this in front of people who need to see it. Share it with someone who follows true crime. Subscribe if you haven't already. We don't do speculation on this channel. We don't do filler. We do the work. Nancy Guthrie is still missing, and this picture is not finished yet.